Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Pamela Robinson, and I'm a professor at the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm pleased to be the moderator for this session today, which is being hosted by City Building TMU, where I'm the academic director. I want to start today's session by acknowledging the land on which we sit. We are in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. As you know, our university changed our name. We've just come up on the 1-year mark of changing our name as part of our efforts to work differently with our Indigenous community members. And if you're interested in learning more about our name change process and the other calls to action that we're taking up, we'll put a contact link in the chat. I'm really excited today that you're able to join us for this session with Assistant Professor Victor Perez-Amado and Cheryll Diego from our neighbor, the Downtown Yonge Business Improvement Area, or the BIA. And the focus of today's session is to talk about the future of Yonge Street downtown and keeping Yonge Love alive. This is the slogan that was used for a long-running campaign to support the street redesign process on Yonge Street and is being carried out as part of the YongeTOmorrow project from the City of Toronto. As you're well aware, the large section of Yonge Street in our neighborhood will be closed for multiple construction projects for the next few years. This is following the pandemic, which had a profoundly negative impact on the small businesses in our community due to the fact that workers and students in the area were no longer coming downtown. Recognizing the challenging conditions ahead for businesses, residents, and visitors in one of our most traveled parts of our city, the Downtown Yonge BIA has recently announced a multi-pronged plan to mitigate the expected disruptions to its restaurants and shops and offices and residents that populate this dense and growing neighborhood and can provide and those people are our neighbors as well. In this conversation, we're going to focus on an interesting partnership between Toronto Metropolitan University and the Downtown Yonge BIA that investigates specific problems and solutions informed by planning research methods. And these outputs have helped the BIA understand and confront the current reality of its members and communities as this redevelopment project moves forward. Before we dive in, I've got a few housekeeping notes. The first thing we want to note is that there's going to be about 25 minutes of discussion between Victor and Cheryll, and then we'll have 10 to 15 minutes to answer the questions that you've got from people posting them in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. So if you just add your questions there, other people can see them and they can vote them up, and we'll also pull from those in that section. This session is also being recorded. You'll be able to find the recording on the City Building TMU website in the next few days. Make sure that you're subscribed to our newsletter so that you can get information about how to access it and other webinars that are forthcoming soon. All right, let's get on with the matter at hand. I'm going to introduce our two speakers. First, I'll start with Cheryll Diego. Cheryll is the Director of Public Realm Experience for the Downtown Yonge BIA. Her portfolio includes events like street operations, planning, and development. She oversees the interplay of these departments to create a welcoming and vibrant community for those who live, work, play, invest, and shop in the heart of Toronto. At the center of Cheryl's work is building meaningful relationships with different stakeholders to address the ever-changing needs of the Downtown Yonge community. Cheryll, we're super happy you're here. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Victor Perez-Amado. Victor is an assistant professor at the School of Urban and Regional Planning at TMU. He's trained as an architect and an urban designer and has worked many years in our field, winning many awards for his work on housing and placemaking before turning to teaching. First, he started at U of T, and then we were lucky enough to snag him, and he's been with us at TMU for the last 3 years. So I'm going to pass it over to Victor and Cheryll, who have a presentation to talk about the work that they're doing together, and then we'll have time for question and answers. So keep in mind that you can post questions. You don't have to wait until the end. You can put the questions in right away. Over to you both. Thanks.
Thanks, Pamela. I think everybody can see our slides now.
Yep.
So, hi, good morning, everyone. As Pamela has mentioned, my name is Cheryll, and I work with the Downtown Yonge BIA. Before we start the presentation, maybe I can give an overview of what a BIA is. Next slide, Victor, please. BIA, or the concept of business improvement area, is actually a Canadian product. It started in the Bloor West village in the 1970s. It started when the subway was built and the shopping malls are cropping up in the neighborhood, the businesses decided to organize themselves and actually pay additional levies to promote their main streets. As the movement grew, it became one of the greatest imports of Canada. The movement of BIAs is actually being observed worldwide. In Toronto at the moment, there are 85 BIAs. The very basic foundation of BIAs is to do to support the city in the beautification and operations of the streets. But now BIAs also do a lot of advocacy works. To give you kind of a sense as to where we are, Downtown Yonge BIA is bounded by Richmond Street, Bay Street, Grosvenor Street. We wiggle a little on the east side, but we always say that our boundary is Church Street. So if you just move north to south, we are about 1.2 kilometers. We represent about 2,000 businesses and property owners. And also about 7.2 billion worth in commercial real estate. Within the 10-minute walking distance of our boundaries, we have about 175 people who call this as their home. And prior to the pandemic, we see about 60 million people walking up and down Yonge Street. But our daytime population would actually grow to about 580,000 people. That's because of all the workers that come into the neighborhood and also the students, the TMU students who come into this space. About 30 to 35% of subway trips do start and end in the 3 subway stations that we have in our boundaries, which is College, Dundas, and Queen Street. As you will see, based on this, our neighborhood is very dense and it continues to grow with the residential development that is happening in the neighborhood. Next slide, please, Victor. So when we started our conversation with Victor in the School of Urban and Regional Planning, we started those conversations at the beginning of the pandemic. So we thought of 2 studies to look into: the recovery from the pandemic and the planning of the future of Yonge Street, because we need to make sure that the neighborhood overcomes the pandemic, recovers from it, and also plan for the future. Every neighborhood has a push and pull factor, the things that bring people into our neighborhood and things that also discourage people from coming into our neighborhood. As we recover from the pandemic, we are not just convincing people that the pandemic is over and that they should come back into the neighborhood, but we are also trying to convince them from the compounding effect of other factors that push people away. So say, for example, the cost of parking, perception of safety, and then we also have to contend with that comfort of working from home and the cost savings and time saving of not having to commute into the downtown core. With a lot of infrastructure work that's happening, and Ontario Line being the largest, that would shut down a portion of Queen Street for the next 5 years, a lot of the reaction from the people is to avoid the downtown. And then we are also, as a community, bracing for YongeTOmorrow, when the water main pipes will be replaced, and it will rip up Yonge Street from the first phase, which will be in our neighborhood, will be from College Street to Queen Street. So with those things in mind, and plus the development, thanks Victor for switching this slide, with those things in mind, actually, Victor, can you flip on the next slide? Yeah, so I've briefly spoken about YongeTOmorrow, but with those things in mind, the construction that is currently happening and the YongeTOmorrow that is about to happen, we figured we'll work on two objectives with Victor and his team. One is to find innovative ways to mitigate the impact of construction to bring people back into the downtown as a response to as one of their pandemic recovery. And then the next objective for us is to develop the design principle so that when we rebuild the public realm, not just from Ontario line, but also when we re up Yonge Street as part of YongeTOmorrow's replacement of the water main pipes. So those were the two focus for us in this project. I'll hand it to you, Victor, now.
Thank you, Cheryl. Once again, I'm Victor Perez-Amado, and I've been working with Cheryl for the last 2 years and with the Creative School and other organizations. And again, we partnered with the Downtown Yonge BIA and the School of Urban and Regional Planning via a MyTax grant, the Creative School and City Building TMU, again, to undertake a complete and comprehensive community needs assessments to identify opportunities, strategize, and design innovative interventions, or as Cheryl mentioned, recommendations to build resilience during a pre- and post-construction disruption of these projects. Our research methodology: first, we conducted research and analysis to develop a deep understanding of the current issues and the impacts of that the pandemic and construction is having on the neighborhood, the businesses, and community. So as you can see here, we developed demographic studies, timelines explaining where construction will happen, the disruption, where are people going, where are people coming from, the current public spaces, how they're being used, even studies of laneways we conducted as well. Then our second method was to really understand through community consultations and surveys with over 100 participants, for example, this one in College Park, to identify opportunities for programmatic elements, areas of focus, and general feedback for the area. So we, in one and a really beautiful summer day, we had all these posters, we brought people, we have QR codes where people could give their answers or put sticky notes and really give us feedback of what this place could be. Another part that was really important for us was to understand from the experience of other BIAs around Canada, what they have done and how they have experienced similar problems. So two of them, what we got in touch with was the BIA in Montreal, because they had the St. Catherine Streets and the Place of the Spectacles. And then we also had the opportunity to talk to the BIA in Vancouver, because they had a similar project where they were redoing an entire street that really affected their businesses. And really important, we have also collaborated with the Toronto Metropolitan University Geospatial Map and Data Center to conduct drone flights and study movement of goods and people on Yonge Street. So that team is Dan Jakubek and Jimmy Tram. And I want to show really quickly what that looks like. See? So with these drones, the difference than studying like with photographs, which are static, and here we can actually see where parks or trucks are being parked, how that can disrupt traffic, where people are actually crossing in different parks, how people are using the spaces. So that gives us a lot of an understanding of the area. If people are jaywalking, where do they park? Where do they go? So that's a little test that we have been doing. And these videos or these type of studies, they're not just one video. We do it per season, and we do it, let's say, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And then we compare and contrast how people are utilizing the spaces in between, in different times of the year, different times of the day. So over the last 1.5 years, we have again created a one-page report where we did the research and analysis that was last year. Then we continue by creating again another report with the strategies where we brought the students. We created a class in our client-based studios at the School of Urban and Regional Planning. And the class was called Yonge 2.0, Strategies for Yonge's Future Development. And in this class, the students were able to have a hands-on experience with the Downtown Yonge BIA and create, as you can see, some of the maps and strategies of where people could go during the construction time, where do delivery systems can happen, and where, for example, how you can access shops, etc. And then how to make the place really pleasant during construction, which is very challenging. And then finally, we have an ongoing report that I'm working with all our students, RAs, and Cheryl, of course. In this study, we have a set of case studies, policy analysis, where we are studying what are the things that we need to understand from a policy scenario and how that can influence the everything that we can put in practice. And then strategies and recommendations on communication. How to communicate with the public so the vision of the project keeps moving and people get excited about what is coming in the next set of years. Here, for example, we had the opportunity again of bringing into the equation students where they really collaborated. We brought YongeTOmorrow, Cheryl and their team to create this very participatory class. So this project again has had many impacts, from the academic to a direct impact to the Downtown Yonge BIA. For example, in the academic side, we have been able to bring again students from classes and engaging them into the process from day one, and creating relationships between the TMU and the Downtown Yonge BIA. And Cheryl will explain a little bit more about this, but the Downtown Yonge BIA also benefits or has an impact that they can use all these recommendations, interviews, and guides and packages that they can put into practice. And with that, I'm gonna leave the floor to you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Victor. I also want to mention that during those interaction with the students, it also gives them an opportunity to actually engage or interact with city staff, so that the feedback that they get is not just from the BIA as their direct client in this project, but we also bring in other stakeholders who are working on the same project that we are working on. Next slide, Victor, please. So for the BIA, the output from Victor's team actually do help us in creating a construction mitigation strategy that we are actually currently implementing right now as we face the challenges of Ontario line construction. The work on this one is ongoing. We're actually still working with Victor's team for the communication strategy that we want to continue to implement throughout the next 4 years of Ontario line. In here, what we wanted is to manage the narrative so that construction, not just the ones that are happening in our neighborhood, but throughout the downtown core, does not contribute to that push factor that is happening right now. For the downtown core or the Downtown Yonge BIA to continue to be a vibrant community and to be continue to be resilient and vibrant, we need the office tower workers back into the neighborhood. Long term, we are creating a construction charter with Victor's team. This charter is what we wanted to implement to any types of construction work that is happening in our neighborhood. If there are things that we can avoid that would discourage people from coming downtown because of construction, we want to make sure that we articulate it to anyone who is coming and doing works in our neighborhood. What we are really excited about also is getting the findings and recommendations in about the design principles that we can apply in the restoration of the public realm when all these huge infrastructure work happens, because we cannot restore the public realm to what it is currently now, because we have to continue to plan for the future. Back to you, Victor.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. And then just to finalize our presentation, a reflection of like, why is these partnerships important between, for example, the Downtown Yonge BIA and the School of Urban and Regional Planning? And in this case, there are many benefits. In our case, it's what we call design-based research, one of them, where we put into practice what we are studying academically. We conduct, again, studies, and those studies actually get done in the community, as Cheryl has mentioned. Then also for us is the mutual knowledge exchange, where we have students working directly with the Downtown Yonge BIA or with other organizations, and that really sets the tone for creating future leaders that are going to be in our field. Students get real life experience into these projects, so that is really important for them. And then again, bringing that research into practice is a really important aspect of for us. And Cheryl can also talk about the benefits for the Downtown Yonge BIA. So back to you, Cheryl.
Thanks. Thanks, Victor. So for Downtown Yonge BIA, I think that the biggest benefit for us is, as a BIA working at arm's length with the city, our resources is really not a lot. And having the students work with them, it's kind of stretching whatever resource we have. I think the great advantage of also TMU being in our doorstep is they know our community. They are familiar with the neighborhood, and they actually live and study in this neighborhood. So I think there is more of a buy-in with the students because of those familiarity. And it's part of our give back to the community also, is giving the students a real life experience. I think it's great whenever the students see their projects come to life, when they see it actually being implemented or being used in the real world, not just in school settings.
All right, so that's it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Thanks to both of you for a really interesting introduction to the work that you've done together. We've got 2 questions from our audience. I'm going to start with them, and I really like to encourage everyone else who's listening to participate along by putting your questions in the chat. The first question that comes asks, are the findings just for the BIA alone, or are you planning to share them with builders and developers as a means to guide them in their work?
Cheryl, maybe that's something that
yeah,
you can
so at the moment it is being used by the BIA. We still have to do the final review with it and share it with our board and stakeholders. Yeah, but Victor and I have this discussion and actually sharing it to a wider audience.
Yeah. And we still have a lot of other studies that we are planning to do from now all the way until the end of the year, before we get to distribute or share this type of knowledge with the construction or other stakeholders.
But one of, sorry, Victor, to cut you off. But as I've mentioned earlier, what we have done in the past, so say, for example, the studio project, is we actually did invite some stakeholders to the students' presentation so that they have a preview as to what is to come. If there is any interest, they can email myself or Victor so that for the next presentations, we can also invite them.
Yeah. Pamela, we cannot hear you.
How's that?
Oh, yes. Now,
Okay, great. I'm sorry. Apologies to our audience members. Thank goodness for redundant technology. So how much of this work is unique to the relationship between our university and our next door neighbor, Downtown Yonge BIA? And how much of it do you think is readily transferable to other neighborhoods? Like we know that Queen Street, for example, is facing a long time shutdown for the construction of the Ontario line, but we also have, you know, we've got communities across the country who are facing the impacts of our infrastructure backlog and investments. So I think there are some lessons here that are probably relevant beyond just our neighborhood. Can both of you talk about that balance between the uniqueness of what's happening here and generalizability to other contexts, please?
yeah, sure. I can start. Actually, that's a discussion that Cheryl and I have had before. How this type of research is a bit of a pilot project. The different research methods, the steps that we have taken from the research analysis, studying the city from with socio-spatially, then understanding through drones, flights, and then doing a construction charter like the one that we are doing, really communicating with the community, doing surveys and community consultations to understand or provide a package or a set of guides that the VIAs can use step by step when working with construction companies, or also when communicating with the general public as well. Because one of the important things is that these projects take a really, really long time. So you have to have or you have to keep the vision of the project alive so people feel excited. So these are some of the things that we have discussed that can be applicable to other places. And those are some of the learnings that we have had also from other VIAs like Vancouver or Montreal that went through similar issues. Yeah.
Cheryl, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, so I just want to emphasize what Victor said. We're in, I think a lot of this is transferable, but they just have to customize it to their neighborhood or community. As Victor said, when we were doing the case studies, we looked at cities similar to Downtown Yonge, like in terms of whether maybe Vancouver is questionable, but in terms of the size and density as a city, we did try and focus on Canadian cities because of a number of laws and regulations. Is very different than, say, if we go to other North American cities. Yeah, so say, for example, the construction mitigation strategy that we have come up, I think that's something that other areas can take into, and again, customize it based on their communities.
So there's a question in the chat, Cheryl, that asks about how do you and your counterparts across the city share your learnings from these kinds of experiences? And also, how are you engaging the residents in the efforts to revitalize the neighborhood?
Okay, so I'll tackle the city first. So we have a constant communication with city staff. As I've mentioned, for one of the projects, the Resilient Young 2.0, we've actually did invite the project managers to come and participate in the conversation. We will at some point share the whole study package to them so they are aware of it. What we have also done is sometimes we'd reach out to them and say, we're doing these studies. Is there any particular thoughts that we should include in the study that we're doing. In terms of the neighborhood, we've actually engaged the residential community in one of the consultation that Victor's team did in the summer. This has more focus as to what types of programming do they want to see in our community, not just in terms of events, but other improvements that we should be doing. Can I share, Victor, what is in the pipeline for us this summer?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So this summer, Victor's team will actually hold a charrette. Because when we were talking about the design principles that we have to embrace for the community, we thought that the community at large should be part of that conversation. So a charrette is being planned sometime in July, and it will be open to the community.
A charrette is an exercise that's a design exercise where we bring different neighbors or business owners, and we have drawings, and it makes it interactive, and we can get feedback from different people into what this could be during and post construction. So it's basically a hands-on workshop.
And I'm just going to pick up one more thread on this counterpart piece before I move on. You know, people who live along Eglinton have been living through the crosstown construction for a long time. In my neighborhood in Parkdale, Roncesvalles, the construction at King, Queen, and Roncesvalles has had a big impact on neighborhoods. Cheryl, are there conversations between counterparts and other business improvement areas and other people who support local businesses? Like, do you all connect to share what you've learned too? Are you networked that way?
Yeah, so we always look at how other communities have done or manage infrastructure work like this. In Toronto, there's actually an organization called DYBIA, which is all the BIAs within Toronto have a regular meeting, and it's a forum to share knowledge and ask question as well. So for Ontario Line, what we're actually doing is we're working very closely with our next door BIA neighbor, Queen West, and we are pulling together our efforts in mitigating the negative impacts of construction.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. One of our participants was interested. I love the way they asked the question. They'd love to hear how cyclists and pedestrians will feel the love during this period.
Sure, I can explain a little bit from some of the results that have happened from our designs at school. The way that we have thought about it is using a lot of the laneways as a way of communicating the Downtown Yonge BIA, but as well like working with the construction developers. So parts of these cycling routes are open while other parts are being constructed, and always work from like, let's say 2 blocks or per 2 blocks rather than doing everything at once, because that will create a lot of disruption in that sense. Cyclists, for example, such as deliveries of goods, that would be another recommendation that we had. For example, the laneways could be another opportunity for that to happen. So it's alleviates a little bit the congestion in front of the businesses. And there's like that they all have direct access, for example. So that could be something. But I leave it up to you, Cheryl, to also add to that.
So if we are talking about the construction that's happening at the moment, which is Ontario Line, the cycling network that we have within the Downtown Yonge area is not impacted. Bay Street, Gerrard, and Richmond Street and Shooter Street, all the bike lanes there have been maintained. It's a different conversation, I think, when you go on other parts of the city. To Victor's point, when YongeTOmorrow happens, it's when we close Yonge Street for the major construction. alternative routes to Yonge Street will be the laneways. That is based on the studies at the moment, that is becoming the alternative route.
Okay, there's a really practical question in the chat, which I think is a good one, which is basically like, can we make the construction happen faster to reduce the disruption?
But that's a question we had with one of the BIAs in Vancouver, actually Montreal. They said there are two options. Either you take the wounds, the Band-Aid fast, and you do it all at once, and that creates a lot of disruption to the entire area, or you do it per segment and it lasts a little bit longer, but the disruption is not as much. So that is a conversation that still needs to happen. What are the benefits, the pros and cons between both of them?
Yeah, so I think to say, for example, for Ontario Line, one of the reasons that they have given us to fully close a section of Queen Street is because it allows them to finish the construction a year ahead. So these are the type of things that we are looking into. But I think the question is bigger than the BIA, bigger than Victor and myself.
Well, and it's an important thing to think about. You know, one of the great things about this neighborhood is that it's not just a place where people work and people study, but people live here, right? And so I think one of the tensions around 24/7 construction is that the people who live here need to sleep. And some of this construction work is very loud. And so there's this, we're trying to balance the residents' needs with the business needs, with the mobility needs and learning needs. And so it's a good question. Responding to it's really hard. But important, I think, this kind of research in part because, you know, as I said, when I didn't have my headphones working, we have $150 billion infrastructure deficit across the country. And infrastructure upgrades, let alone progressive infrastructure investments, mean that we have a lot of infrastructure work to do. And so it's important to ask these questions and to be creative about the ways in which we can respond to both get the work done, minimize disruption, and get on with the good work at hand. There's a question from one of our audience members that asks about what's being done in terms of working with our neighbors who are street engaged and either partially or fully living in our neighborhoods on the streets. Are either of you able to speak to how those community members are being included in conversations moving forward? It may be outside the scope of the BIA, but curious if you're able to shed any light on the plans for those community members in our neighborhood.
We at the BIA have a safe and inclusive strategy. So when we are doing community engagement, we put our best effort to include them in their in those engagement pieces. In terms of long-term, in terms of, say, if the question is alluding to providing housing and all that stuff, it's not something that I can speak of at the moment.
Victor, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I don't. No,
it's
I think
okay if
Cheryl
no.
mentioned it all.
Okay,
Cheryl mentioned everything.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions. One of our colleagues asked, what specific metrics will be used to monitor construction disruption and the impact of mitigation efforts like footfall and consumer spending and store vacancies? And there's a follow-up question around, is there going to be a before and after study to study the impact after the work is finished?
So for Downtown Yonge BIA, we do have some data, pandemic data in terms of foot flow, vehicular flow in the neighborhood. We are also looking at consumer spending. We have some data as to what is the spending per category in the last few years, and we will continue to gather those data so that we can have a comparison during and then post construction.
And then as far as this project, it goes until this year, but then future conversations with Cheryl is, as the person mentioned, doing studies while these projects or while all these projects are taking place. So yeah, that's a future conversation that we have.
Okay, great. Oh, go ahead, Cheryl. Yeah.
Oh, no, I believe the city is also looking into like the economic impact of construction, particularly Ontario line, not just in our area, but a wider scope.
A quick question, and I'm not sure if this is in your scope, Cheryl. Do you know if the environmental assessment is complete for the Ontario line, which looks at construction disruption? It is complete?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. That's a quick fact check on that. Okay, here's a really interesting question from our audience. And it talks about the pushback against complete streets that's happening just north of our area. And so, Cheryl, how does it work in terms of connecting up a continuous network of BIAs? Like, are you speaking with the folks who are further north in terms of making sure that connectivity remains the same and it's not this patchwork of complete, incomplete as you head down? I mean, I know that's not entirely your responsibility, but curious about how those conversations unfold.
Yeah, so we have constant conversations with the BIAs north of us and south of us. Actually, we are working with them on a number of initiatives. But at the end of the day, we can advocate for those things, but it is still a transportation exercise and the city would have to make the decisions. That's why for us, the work that we're doing with Victor's team is really important because it will help us in our advocacy works with the city as to how to design our streets.
And also just remind everyone, we are in the middle of a mayoral election. You may see people knocking on your doors. Those are good questions to ask mayoral candidates about how they're going to ensure complete connectivity along the way, because it's an election. So it's a good time to ask those kinds of questions.
And just to add to Cheryl, again, the package that we're producing has a set of what we call the charter, design charter, construction charter, sorry, and the design principles. And those are like step-by-step of how, when the construction can happen, like the construction companies need to keep things tidy, for example, or how the streets need to be properly designed, how to engage community members. So all these things that other BIAs can put into practice when developing a complete streets. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm going to take one last question from the Q&A and then we'll start to wrap up. And the question is directed at Victor, and it talks about what's it like working with students? How do you do it? Some of them do great work. Some of them do not always great work. But I also want to get Cheryl to weigh in on what it's like working with students. I have to say that the BIA is an incredible supporter of experiential learning opportunities for our students. The numbers of interns you've taken to give students a chance to connect the dots between what they're learning on campus and what's happening, half a block over on Yonge Street it's a really impactful learning experience for our students. So Victor, can you talk a little bit about how do we make sure that the work from our students is high quality and important? And Cheryl, maybe talk a little bit about what it's like working with our students.
So I've had the privilege of working with really good students, I'm not gonna lie, from all the research assistants that we have had so far. And then the classes, for example, the client-based studio that we had last year, they were all really excellent students, very passionate about the topic, also because they're neighbors. Some of them have lived around the area and they want to create change. The other part that was really important for them was that they could go to the site, they could go walk around the area and really understand the problems that the neighborhood is facing, right? Then the other parts, how to keep the work being pushed with the students, is I honestly sit and work hands-on with them nonstop on a weekly basis, draw with them, ask them to do exercises. So it's a back and forth. It's not that I just expect them to do all of the sudden work, but it's a relationship that I develop with the students to create work weekly, revise it, bring feedback, to conduct research, and always keep them excited about the work that they are doing. And also it's really important. For example, we had side trips where Cheryl and her team were there explaining the issues. So students are always, it's always a participatory educational experience for them that keeps the ball rolling, basically. So that's a really good.
And one of the ways in which our studios work is that students do interim and final presentations that are public, but there are also other community members and stakeholders who come and listen and provide feedback. And so, as Cheryl mentioned in her presentation, that there are staff from the city that students are getting feedback on. So it does help. Cheryl, thoughts about what it's like working with students? We really value the opportunities you provide, maybe just for other people thinking, oh, should we partner with students?
Yeah, so I just want to preface this conversation, this part of the conversation where we also did work with other students outside the School of Urban Planning. We work with, I think, 3 other departments, or at least myself worked with other 3 schools or departments within the university. It has been great, but especially seeing the students push themselves in terms of the outputs, and they also bring in new perspective in some of the topics that we have discussed. In some works that we have done with the students, they actually did create an actual installation, for lack of a better word, that actually helped animate our street. So it's not just all academic and research based, but there are an actual physical output that we can actually bring into the community. But I will not lie, sometimes it is we have to put in a bit of a time and effort to make sure to guide the students, because again, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the output that they will be providing us is something that is useful to us. So that's why we have to invest our time as well to feed the information that they need.
So it's a constant work.
Yes. Okay, we're at time. So I want to thank both of you for your insight, for sharing your experience, and also for speaking frankly about the importance of the work, but also the challenge of the work in terms of working together. Certainly, I know on the institutional side, like at TMU, we're very grateful that the BIA is such an open and engaging neighbor. And I hope that you feel like we take our role as a neighbor seriously. For everybody listening, I just want to remind you, I want to pick up on a point that Cheryl made, which is we need people to come back to work. And I think that, whether it's the work that's happening in our neighborhood or our Canadian Urban Institutes Bring Back Main Street efforts, part of being a good community member is re-engaging in places where there are small businesses and being an active member of communities as we all start to live our lives more outside our homes. And so it's important to think about going back to where you used to go sometimes as part of a city building effort. I also want to thank our audience members. We had lots of questions that were really great, ranging from practical to bigger kind of process and governance related questions. So thank you for your active engagement. If you find this kind of discussion interesting, you might want to tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're hosting a session about a new space for community in Brampton, in which I'm hosting our Dean, Kira Scarabaghi. And he's going to talk about the Community Transformation Cafe partnership with the Faculty of Community Services at the Toronto Metropolitan University is opening in collaboration with the City of Brampton and its community members as we move towards opening a medical school in Brampton. So again, it's a conversation about our university trying to engage in meaningful partnership with our community members. So that's tomorrow, and you can register online. Thanks so much to everyone who came today. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the folks behind the scenes who helped make this webinar happen. Stay tuned, and the webinar will be posted on the City Building TMU website. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.